Ethan Carter had lived alone in the wilderness for 5 years. His small cabin stood deep in the forest, far from any town. He liked it that way. No noise, no people, just the sound of wind through the trees and the river flowing nearby. But tonight was different. A storm raged outside, shaking the cabin's wooden walls. Thunder rolled across the sky, and heavy rain poured down like an endless waterfall. Ethan sat near the fireplace, sharpening his hunting knife, when suddenly, boom! A loud crash echoed through the night, followed by a strange blue flash. Ethan stood up immediately. That was no thunder. Something had fallen near his cabin. Grabbing his flashlight and shotgun, he stepped out into the rain. The forest was dark, but Ethan moved carefully, his instincts sharp from years of survival. Then he saw it, a small crater steaming in the middle of the clearing. And inside it, someone was lying there. At first, he thought it was a badly burned person, but as he moved closer, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't human. The figure was a woman, but unlike any woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a shimmering silver blue. Her long hair clung to her face, soaked from the rain. She wore a strange, tight suit that looked damaged, torn in places. Her eyes, half open, were a deep violet color that glowed faintly in the dark. She was wounded. Ethan hesitated. What the hell was he looking at? Some kind of government experiment. A creature from another planet. The woman coughed, her body shivering. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak sound before her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness. Ethan looked around. If she had fallen from the sky, someone, or something, might come looking for her. He wasn't sure why, but his instincts told him he couldn't leave her here. Sighing, he lifted her into his arms. Her body was light, much lighter than he expected. She was cold, her skin almost freezing to the touch. "This is a bad idea," Ethan muttered to himself, but he carried her back to his cabin anyway. Inside, he laid her on his small bed, then grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her. He had no idea how to treat an alien injury, but he did what he could, cleaning the cuts and making sure she was warm. The woman stirred slightly, her breathing uneven. Her hands twitched as if she was dreaming. Ethan sat down in a chair nearby, watching her. He had a million questions. Where had she come from? Was she dangerous? And what did that strange blue flash mean? For now, all he could do was wait. An hour passed. The storm outside began to calm, but inside the cabin, the tension only grew. Then, the woman's eyes snapped open. She gasped, sitting up quickly. Her body trembled, and her glowing eyes locked onto Ethan with fear and confusion. Ethan raised his hands. "Hey, easy. I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't understand. Her breathing was rapid, her muscles tense, as if she was ready to fight. Then she winced, holding her side. She was in pain. Ethan pointed to her wound. "You're hurt. You need rest." For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet, shaky voice, she spoke. "You helped me." Ethan was surprised she spoke English, though her accent was strange. He nodded. "Yeah, you crashed near my cabin. What are you?" The woman hesitated, then looked down at herself as if remembering something important. Her violet eyes softened, and she whispered, "I am Scifi." She looked back at him. "And you are in danger now." Ethan's grip on his shotgun tightened as the alien woman, Scifi, stared at him with glowing violet eyes. Her words echoed in his mind. "You are in danger now." The storm outside had faded to a soft drizzle, but inside the small wooden cabin, tension hung thick in the air. Ethan exhaled slowly. "What do you mean? Who's coming?" Scifi shivered under the blanket, still weak from her injuries. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "They will come for me," she whispered. "They never let anyone escape." Ethan frowned. "Who? The government? Aliens? Sarivek swallowed hard. The Sovereign Dominion. My own people. Ethan's eyes narrowed. So, you're a fugitive. Sarivek flinched at the word. She turned her gaze downward, gripping the blanket tightly. In their eyes, yes. But I only did what was right. Ethan wasn't sure what to think. He had rescued an alien woman, and now she was telling him her own people were hunting her down. If this was true, then he was caught in something far bigger than he ever wanted. You shouldn't have helped me, Sarivek murmured. If they find me here, they will destroy everything, including you. Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering his options. He could throw her out and pretend none of this ever happened. But the moment he looked at her, wounded, exhausted, and clearly desperate, he knew he wouldn't do that. Then what do we do? He asked. Sarivek looked at him, surprised. You will help me? Ethan shrugged. Well, I already pulled you out of a crater and patched you up. Might as well see this through. For the first time, her expression softened. She looked as if she wanted to say something but held back. Ethan sighed. All right. First things first. We need to get you some food. You eat normal food, right? Sarivek gave a weak nod. I'd require nutrients, but my body processes food differently. Figures. Ethan stood up and walked to the small wooden kitchen. He had dried meat, canned beans, and some leftover bread. He grabbed a plate, put a little of everything on it, and brought it over to her. She studied the food cautiously. Then, to his surprise, she reached out and picked up a piece of dried meat. She sniffed it before taking a tiny bite. For a moment, she simply chewed. Then her eyes widened slightly. This is good. Ethan chuckled. Glad to hear it. Eat up. You need your strength. As she ate, he watched her carefully. She seemed more at ease now, though there was still fear in her eyes. He decided to push a little further. So tell me, Sarivek, why are they after you? She hesitated, staring at the plate. I disobeyed an order, she finally said. A cruel one. Ethan waited, giving her space to explain. My people, they conquer, she continued. They expand their empire across the stars, taking what they want. Planets, resources, lives. I was part of their elite force, a commander. I was given an order to eradicate an innocent colony. Ethan's jaw tightened. And you refused. Sarivek nodded. I saw families, children, people who had done nothing wrong. My heart could not bear it. So I turned against my own fleet. I tried to stop them. Her hands trembled as she clenched them into fists. They labeled me a traitor. They sent hunters after me. I barely escaped. She took a shaky breath. And now I am here, on your world. Ethan studied her face. She wasn't lying. He could see the pain in her eyes. She had lost everything because she chose to do the right thing. Damn, he muttered. That's rough. She let out a bitter laugh. That is an understatement. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. So what happens if they find you? Sarivek's expression darkened. They will not stop until I am dead. And if they know you helped me. She met his gaze. They will kill you too. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, that's just great. Silence settled between them. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving only the sound of dripping water from the roof. Sarivek suddenly winced and clutched her side. Hey, easy, Ethan said, stepping closer. You're still hurt. She nodded weakly. I require rest. Ethan exhaled and stood up. All right, you sleep. I'll keep watch. She hesitated. You would protect me. Ethan smirked. Lady, I didn't pull you out of that crater just to let you get caught. Get some rest. Sarivek's violet eyes softened once more. Thank you, Ethan. She lay down, pulling the blanket over herself. Within minutes, her breathing slowed, and she drifted into sleep. Ethan, however, remained awake. He sat near the window, staring out into the dark forest. His gut told him something was coming, and he had a bad feeling they didn't have much time. Ethan sat near the window, his shotgun resting across his lap. The storm had passed, leaving the forest silent, but something about that silence felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. His eyes flicked to Scifi, who lay on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Her breathing was slow and steady, but her brow furrowed even in sleep. Whatever nightmares haunted her, they weren't over. Ethan sighed and looked outside again. A bad feeling gnawed at his gut. If her people were really hunting her, then he doubted they would wait long. Then he saw it. A light, far in the distance, between the trees. Small, flickering, moving. Ethan's grip on the shotgun tightened. He didn't own any neighbors nearby. No one should be out there at this hour. His heart pounded as he reached out and shook Scifi's shoulder. "Wake up." She gasped, her glowing violet eyes snapping open. Do what?" "We have company." Scifi pushed herself up, still weak. Her eyes darted to the window, and the moment she saw the moving lights, her face paled. "They found me." Ethan clenched his jaw. "How many?" Scifi closed her eyes for a second, focusing. Then she whispered, 3, maybe 4. Soldiers. Ethan cursed under his breath. His cabin was strong, but it wasn't a fortress. If these were trained killers, they wouldn't knock on the door and ask politely. He grabbed his hunting knife, tucking it into his belt. "Can you fight?" Scifi tried to stand but staggered, gripping the couch. "Not well. Not yet." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then we hide you." She shook her head. "If they don't find me, they will destroy everything. Burn this place down. Kill you." Ethan gave a half smirk. "Well, I'm not planning to die today." He turned, moving quickly. If they were coming, he needed to be ready. He switched off the cabin lights, plunging the room into darkness. Then he grabbed his old rifle from the wall, loading it with steady hands. Scifi watched him. "You would fight. For me." Ethan met her gaze. "They came to my home. They're threatening my life. My land. Doesn't matter if you're human or alien. You're under my roof, and I don't abandon people in trouble." Her expression softened. Something unreadable flickered in her eyes. Then, a sound outside. A soft crunch of boots on wet leaves. Ethan's grip tightened on his shotgun. He moved to the window and peered out carefully. Shadows moved among the trees. Then, a deep mechanical voice called out, "Scifi, we know you are here." Scifi flinched. Ethan felt the air grow tense around her. The voice continued, cold and emotionless. "Do not resist. Surrender now, and the human will not suffer." Ethan muttered, "Yeah, sure. I totally believe that." Scifi's breathing quickened. "Ethan, they won't stop." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "I know." A long silence followed. Then, a loud metallic thump. They were coming. Ethan took a deep breath. "All right. If I don't make it, run." But before he could move, Scifi grabbed his wrist. "No." Ethan stared at her. A strange warmth radiated from her touch. She closed her eyes and exhaled. A faint glow spread from her fingertips, and for a second, Ethan felt something inside him shift. His heartbeat steadied. His mind felt clearer, stronger. Scifi opened her eyes. "Now you will last longer." Ethan had no idea what she just did, but he felt different, more focused, more alive. Then, a crash. The front door burst open, sending splinters flying. 3 figures stepped inside, tall, armored alien. Their weapons hummed with energy. Their faces were hidden behind helmets with glowing red visors. The lead soldier pointed at Scifi. "You are ordered to return. Now." Scifi stood, trembling but defiant. "I will never return." The soldier raised his weapon. "Then you will die." Ethan didn't wait. Boom! His shotgun roared, blasting the first soldier back. The impact sent the armored alien stumbling, but not down. The second one lunged forward, raising his energy rifle. Ethan dodged, barely. The blast sizzled past his ear, burning a hole in the wooden wall. Sarivek lifted her hands. A pulse of energy shot forward, knocking the third soldier off balance. Ethan pumped his shotgun. Fired again. This time, the first soldier collapsed. The other two regrouped quickly. Ethan could see it now. These weren't just normal soldiers. They were hunters, trained to kill. And he and Sarivek were outnumbered. Sarivek looked at him, her voice urgent. "We can't win this fight. We have to escape." Ethan's teeth clenched. He hated running. But she was right. Back door. Now. They moved fast. Another blast tore through the cabin, setting a chair on fire. Ethan grabbed a small bag of supplies before shoving the door open. Cold air hit them as they ran into the dark forest. Behind them, the soldiers roared in anger. Ethan knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Ethan and Sarivek ran into the forest, their footsteps crunching against the damp leaves. The cold air bit at their skin, and the darkness made it hard to see. But they couldn't stop. Behind them, the alien soldiers were already recovering. Shouts echoed through the trees. "Do not let them escape." Ethan gritted his teeth. He could hear the metallic clanking of armored boots getting closer. The hunters were fast. Faster than any human. Sarivek stumbled slightly, still weak. Ethan grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. "Come on. We need to move faster." I'm trying," she panted. "But my strength is not fully returned." A blast of energy shot past them, striking a tree nearby. The bark exploded, sending shards flying. Ethan ducked, shielding Sarivek. "They're shooting at us." Sarivek's eyes glowed faintly, and she pressed a hand against Ethan's chest. "Trust me." Before he could ask what she meant, she whispered something in her alien language. A strange warmth spread through his body. Then, his legs felt lighter. He blinked in shock. Suddenly, he could run faster, much faster. What did you do?" Sarivek smiled weakly. "I shared a little of my energy. Now run." And they ran. The world blurred around them. Ethan felt like he was moving faster than ever before, his feet barely touching the ground. The hunters roared in frustration behind them. "They are enhanced. Increase pursuit speed." Ethan growled under his breath. They wouldn't stop. Up ahead, the trees grew denser and the terrain sloped downward. Ethan made a quick decision. This way. He pulled Sarivek toward a narrow animal trail. They darted through low-hanging branches, slipping past thorny bushes that tore at their clothes. The soldiers weren't as lucky. Their bulky armor slowed them down, and Ethan could hear them crashing through obstacles. "Good. They can't move as fast in tight spaces," Ethan muttered. Sarivek gasped. "But we still need to get away from their tracking devices." Ethan froze for a second. "Tracking devices?" Sarivek nodded. "They can sense my biosignature. No matter how far we run, they will find me." Ethan swore under his breath. "Then we need to get rid of that signal." She hesitated. "I can block it for a short time, but I need a place to focus." Ethan scanned their surroundings. A little further ahead, he saw an old, abandoned mine entrance, barely visible in the dark. "That'll do. Come on." They rushed inside. The mine smelled like damp earth and rust, and the walls were covered in moss. Sarivek collapsed against the wall, panting. I will need a few minutes." Ethan knelt beside her, gripping his shotgun. Outside, the forest was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then, the sound of approaching footsteps. The soldiers were coming. Sarivek closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she concentrated. A faint purple glow surrounded her. Ethan held his breath. If she didn't block the signal in time, they were finished. Then, a deep mechanical voice from outside. "The signature is fading. A second soldier responded. "She is interfering. We must hurry." Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon. His heart pounded. Suddenly, the glow around Scifi vanished. "It's done," she whispered. "They can't track me anymore." Ethan exhaled. Good. But now, they needed to get out before the soldiers checked the mine. He gestured for her to follow. They moved deeper into the tunnels, stepping carefully over old wooden beams. The path twisted and turned, leading them further underground. Finally, they reached a narrow side tunnel, just big enough for them to hide. Ethan pressed his back against the stone wall, keeping his shotgun ready. Scifi clung to his side, breathing softly. Then, the sound of footsteps inside the mine. Ethan's pulse quickened. The soldiers were searching. Their heavy boots echoed through the tunnels. One of them spoke in a low, robotic voice. They were here. Search everything. Scifi tensed beside Ethan, gripping his sleeve. Her fingers were cold. Ethan could see the red glow of their visors reflecting on the tunnel walls. The soldiers were getting closer. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. One mistake, and they were dead. Scifi whispered, barely audible, "If they find us, I will surrender." Ethan turned to her, eyes sharp. "Not a chance." She swallowed. "They won't stop unless I." Ethan shook his head. "We're getting out of this. Together." She stared at him, surprised by his determination. No one had ever fought for her like this before. The soldiers stepped closer. The tunnel was dark, but their visor lights scanned every corner. Ethan held his breath. The lead soldier paused, just a few feet from their hiding spot. His helmet tilted slightly, as if he sensed something. Ethan tightened his grip on the shotgun. If they found them, he would have to act fast. The soldier's visor flickered. Then, he turned away. "No sign of them," he said. "We will expand the search outside." Ethan exhaled slowly. They were safe, for now. As the soldiers retreated, their footsteps faded into the distance. Scifi slumped against the wall. That was close. Ethan smirked, finally allowing himself to breathe. Too close. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. The hunters wouldn't stop, and he wasn't going to let them take her. Ethan kept his ears sharp as the soldiers' footsteps faded into the distance. The mine was silent now, but that didn't mean they were safe. Scifi leaned against the cold rock wall, breathing heavily. Her face was pale, and sweat glistened on her forehead. Ethan could tell she was exhausted from using her powers. "Are you okay?" he whispered. She nodded weakly. "Blocking the signal took more energy than I expected." Ethan frowned. "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said, but when she tried to stand, her legs trembled. Ethan caught her before she fell. Her body was cold. "You need rest," he muttered. "But we can't stay here. If they send drones, we're finished." Scifi looked up at him. "Where can we go?" Ethan thought for a moment. They needed a place to regroup and plan. The enemy was powerful, and running wouldn't work forever. Then, an idea struck him. "There's an old hunting cabin nearby," he said. "I used it a few times in the past. It's hidden deep in the woods, and no one goes there." Scifi nodded. "Then let's go." Ethan helped her to her feet. Her body was light, and he could feel her shivering slightly. They moved cautiously through the mine, staying close to the walls. The darkness was thick, but Ethan had explored many places like this before. Finally, they'd reached the exit. The night was cold, and the wind carried the faint whispers of the forest. Ethan scanned the area. No sign of soldiers. "Coast is clear," he said. "Let's move." They stepped out into the forest, keeping low and silent. The trees swayed gently, and the sound of distant wildlife filled the air. Ethan led the way, guiding Scifi through narrow trails and thick undergrowth. His heart pounded, knowing that at any moment their enemies could return. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. There it was, the old cabin. It was nothing fancy, just a wooden structure, slightly tilted from years of neglect. But it had 4 walls, a roof, and a fireplace. Ethan pushed the door open. Dust filled the air, and the wooden floor creaked under his boots. Sci-Fi followed him inside, looking around curiously. "You lived here?" "Not really. Just a place to stay when I needed to disappear." He checked the supplies. Some old blankets, a few canned goods, and a first aid kit. It wasn't much, but it would do. "Here," he said, handing her a blanket. "Wrap yourself up. You need to rest." Sci-Fi took it gratefully and sat by the fireplace, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Ethan knelt and lit the fire. Soon, warm light filled the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Sci-Fi sighed softly. "This feels safe." "For now," Ethan muttered, staring into the flames. There was silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "You didn't have to do all this for me." Ethan glanced at her. "I wasn't going to let them take you." She looked down, her fingers gripping the blanket. "Where I come from, no one ever fights for someone like me." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Sci-Fi hesitated. Then she spoke in a quiet voice. "My people have a strict society. Strength is everything. The weak are abandoned. If someone like me, someone hunted, runs, no one helps. They just let us disappear." Ethan clenched his fists. "That's not how we do things." Sci-Fi studied him. "Humans are different." He shrugged. "We protect our own. And right now, you're under my protection." She smiled faintly, then closed her eyes, exhausted. Within minutes, she fell into a deep sleep. Ethan sat by the fire, gripping his shotgun. Sleep could wait. He knew their enemies weren't far, and they would come again. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the alien soldiers stood in formation, their red visors glowing in the night. Their commander stepped forward, his armor gleaming under the moonlight. "They have escaped for now," he said, "but the hunt is not over." Another soldier kneeled. "Commander, we lost her signal. She is hiding." The commander's lips curled in a cruel smile. "Then we burn the forest down until she has nowhere left to hide." The air was cold, but Ethan's blood was boiling. He sat by the riverbank, reloading his shotgun with steady hands. Sci-Fi watched him in silence, her purple eyes filled with worry. "You really think we can win?" she asked softly. Ethan looked up at her. "Running isn't an option anymore. If we don't fight, they'll never stop hunting you." Sci-Fi took a deep breath. She knew he was right. She couldn't keep running forever. And Ethan, this human who had given her shelter, protection, and hope, had already risked too much for her. "I won't let you fight alone," she said. Ethan smirked. "Didn't think you would." They needed a plan. The river had bought them some time, but the enemy wouldn't stop until they found them. Ethan knew the only way to end this was to turn the tables. Instead of running, they would strike first. He pulled out a small map from his backpack. "There's an old communications tower on that hill," he pointed. "If we can get to it, I can send out a distress signal." Sci-Fi frowned. "Will anyone hear it?" "Maybe. Maybe not," Ethan admitted. "But if they do, we'll have backup." She nodded. "Then we go." They moved quickly through the forest, staying low and avoiding open areas. The fire had died down, but the enemy soldiers were everywhere. Ethan led the way, keeping his shotgun ready. Sci-Fi followed closely, her alien senses sharp, listening for danger. Then, voices ahead. Ethan signaled for her to stop. He peeked through the bushes and saw 2 alien soldiers standing near a fallen tree. They were blocking the path to the tower. Sci-Fi whispered, "I can distract them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How?" She placed her hands on the ground. A moment later, vines crept from the earth, wrapping around the soldiers' feet. The aliens yelled in shock, struggling to free themselves. Ethan didn't waste time. He rushed forward, striking one soldier with the butt of his shotgun. The alien collapsed. The second one broke free, reaching for his weapon. But Sci-Fi was faster. She extended her hand, and the branches of a nearby tree moved, knocking the soldier out cold. Ethan stared at her. "That's a neat trick." She smirked. "Told you I could help." They kept moving, reaching the base of the tower. But just as Ethan started climbing the metal ladder, a gunshot rang out. He ducked, barely avoiding the bullet. Sci-Fi gasped. "They found us." More soldiers emerged from the trees, their weapons raised. Ethan fired first, taking down one enemy. Sci-Fi used her power to make the roots rise, knocking another soldier off his feet. But more kept coming. Ethan shouted, "Get to the top. I'll hold them off." Sci-Fi hesitated, but then she climbed, moving as fast as she could. Ethan reloaded and fired again, but he was running out of ammo. The enemy closed in, and he knew he couldn't hold them forever. Then, a roar of engines in the sky. A human aircraft soared overhead. The distress signal had worked. The soldiers hesitated, looking up. In that moment, a missile struck the ground nearby, sending them scattering. Ethan grinned. "Looks like backup arrived." Sci-Fi reached the top of the tower and activated the signal fully. A bright blue light shot into the sky, a beacon calling for help from anyone nearby. The alien commander, watching from a distance, clenched his fists. "We've lost this battle," he growled. "Fall back." The enemy retreated into the forest. Ethan exhaled, finally lowering his shotgun. They had won. Sci-Fi climbed down, her eyes shining. "We did it." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but it's not over yet." More human ships were approaching, and soon the real fight for her freedom would begin. But now they had a chance. She looked at him, her voice filled with emotion. "Ethan, thank you." He smiled. "You gave me a reason to fight. Now let's make sure this was worth it." She took his hand. Together, they faced the rising sun. And the war was just beginning. Ethan sat near the fire, his shotgun resting on his lap. The warmth of the cabin was comforting, but his mind was alert. He knew their enemies were still searching. Sci-Fi slept soundly, her face relaxed for the first time since they met. She had been through so much, hunted, wounded, and forced to flee her own people. Yet even now, she trusted him. Ethan's grip on the shotgun tightened. He wouldn't let them take her. Then, a sound outside. A distant rustling. A low crack of a branch. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He moved to the window and peered out. The forest was dark, but something felt wrong. Then he saw it, a faint red glow in the distance. At first, he thought it was just the moonlight. But then the glow grew stronger, spreading through the trees. His heart sank. Fire. The enemy wasn't searching anymore. They were burning the forest to flush them out. Ethan rushed to Sci-Fi and shook her shoulder. "Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open. "Ethan, we have to move. Now." She sat up, still groggy. Then she smelled it. The sharp, bitter scent of smoke. Her expression changed immediately. "They found us." "Not exactly. They're burning the forest to force us out." Sci-Fi's eyes widened. "If they destroy this place, there's nowhere left to hide." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. That's why we leave before it's too late." He grabbed his backpack and handed her a water bottle. "Drink this. We might be running for a while." She took a sip, then stood up, still a little unsteady. Ethan opened the door carefully and looked outside. The fire was still far, but the smoke was thickening. "We stick to the shadows and move fast," he said. No sound, no hesitation. Sci-Fi nodded, her purple eyes sharp with determination. They slipped out of the cabin and into the trees. The air was already hot, the fire creeping closer. The crackling of burning wood filled the silence of the night. Ethan led the way through the thick undergrowth, pushing forward even as the smoke stung his throat. He could hear the distant voices of enemy soldiers, They were closing in, waiting for their prey to run. They had to be smarter. Scifi suddenly grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "I have an idea." Ethan turned to her. "What is it?" She placed a hand on the bark of a nearby tree, her fingers glowing faintly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the tree's branches moved. Ethan's eyes widened. "You can control plants." Scifi nodded. "Only a little. But I can make them help us." She took a deep breath, focusing. The trees around them shifted slightly, their leaves whispering in the wind. Then, suddenly, a path opened, a hidden tunnel through the thickest part of the forest. "This will take us to the river," she said. "The fire won't reach there fast enough." Ethan didn't ask questions. He just grabbed her hand and ran. The trees closed behind them as they moved, hiding their trail from the soldiers. The heat was growing unbearable, but they pushed forward. Then, gunfire. Bullets tore through the branches just behind them. The enemy had seen movement. "Faster!" Ethan shouted. They reached the river just as more shots rang out. The water was dark and rushing fast. Scifi hesitated. "Can you swim?" Ethan smirked. "Better than I can run." Then he grabbed her waist and jumped in. The cold water hit like a shock, but it was a welcome relief from the heat. The current pulled them downstream, away from the fire and the soldiers. Above them, the enemy shouted, their voices growing distant. Ethan held on to Scifi, keeping her afloat as they let the river carry them away from danger. After what felt like an eternity, the current slowed, and Ethan pulled them towards the riverbank. They crawled onto the shore, soaking wet and gasping for breath. Scifi coughed and rolled onto her back, staring up at the night sky. That was terrifying. Ethan chuckled. "Could have been worse." She turned her head to look at him. "How?" He grinned. "We could have hit rocks." She laughed softly, shaking her head. Even after everything, he still found a way to joke. Then her face grew serious. "Ethan, they won't stop. They'll keep hunting me." Ethan sat up. His expression hardened. "Then we stop running." Scifi looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He checked his shotgun, making sure it was still in working condition. "I mean, it's time we fight back." Meanwhile, back at the burning forest, the alien commander stood at the edge of the river, watching the flames consume the land. A soldier approached. They escaped into the water. The commander smirked. "Good. Let them run. It won't matter." He turned to his troops. "They cannot run forever. Increase the patrols. Find them." He looked back at the river, his red eyes glowing in the night. "And when you do, bring them to me alive."